In 1989, the economic blockade of Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh began. The bandit attacks and pogroms on the roads, relentless murders of civilians, the forceful deportation of residents of Armenian villages, kidnappings, tortures, humiliation, and beatings all took place. In Baku itself, the situation was deteriorating day by day. Armenians were largely fired from work. They were insulted and humiliated in the offices, public transport, shops, and public offices where they applied to receive documents. Due to the implementation of ethnic cleansing from 1988 to 1992, over 500,000 Armenians were forcefully deported from Azerbaijan.
С работы всех прогнали, работать не дают, вот так. Остались вы как на... Правильно.
А бумажка как?
Невозможно жить, невозможно стучать. Вот это бросили, каждый день бросают. Уходите, или ваш дом будет сожжен. На работе говорит, уходите, записки разные пишут. В общем, невозможно там жить.
Only within 1 year preceding the January genocide of Armenians in Baku, over 60 citizens of Armenian origin were inconspicuously killed in their homes, at work, and in the streets. Hundreds of Armenians were crippled, dozens of thousands exiled. From an article, Black Cold January, in the newspaper Ofto, January 22nd to 28, 1991. Here are just some of the examples of what was happening that month. December 1st, the 60-year-old Armenian Gasparov was tortured to death. The same day, another Armenian was murdered. His name was not identified. Armenian graves were desecrated, gravestones destroyed. December 10th, Suren Krikorian was killed at his house after the most cruel tortures. December 16th, 2 Armenians were captured on subway station, April 28. One was beaten to death, the other managed to escape. December 26th, the Armenian church on the Fountain Square was set on fire. On December 31, the state borders between the Nakhichevan Autonomous Republic and Iran, all along the Araks River, were completely destroyed. Less than 2 weeks remained until the final act of Armenian pogroms in Baku. By January 1990, only 35,000 Armenians out of 230,000 remained in Baku. Those were mostly elderly and sick people, as well as their relatives who stayed to care for them. In the meantime, the targeted anti-Armenian psychosis was deepening in the town. Multi-thousand demonstrations of the People's Front were underway, with the main slogans reading, "Death to Armenians." On January 10, 1990, a state of emergency was announced, but not in Baku, in the Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Republic and some other areas where peaceful demonstrations were organized with demands to stop the violence against Armenians. The policy of state terrorism against peaceful citizens of Armenian nationality was coming to its logical end. On January 12th, the representatives of the radical wing of the People's Front of Azerbaijan, Nemat Panakhov and Ragim Gaziev, announced during a broadcast of Baku TV that the town is full of homeless people, whereas thousands of Armenians are still living in comfort. And immediately 5,000 demonstrators spread over the town with addresses of Armenian flats in their hands. Minister for the Interior Vadim Bakatin will say 2 months later at a session of the Supreme Council of the USSR.
Ну, десятки трупов валяли в нашем блоке вот так. Она говорит, когда я эту картину увидела, все в крови, наша улица, она скорее хотела домой. Прибежала, увидела, что в лифте валяется там мой муж весь в крови, и она упала в обморок.
Irina Mosesova, the author of Armenians of Baku, Existence and Exodus, describes a clear mechanism of preparation and implementation of pogroms. Drafting of a detailed map of the town, with sites inhabited by the remaining Armenians marked on the map. Large-scale, offensive anti-Armenian campaign in the media started by a significant part of the Azerbaijani intelligentsia. Assaults, beatings, and killings of individuals of Armenian origin in the streets of the town and in public transport. Coordination of activities of employees of the condominiums with militia and ambulance crews in the course of the forthcoming pogroms, which in essence was nothing other than sabotage. The Russian citizens of Baku who fled from the town after January 1990 testified. When the pogroms began, the extremists had exact addresses of where the Armenians lived, Russians, mixed families. But the pogrom makers not only had the addresses, they had the map of Baku where areas populated by Armenians were marked by crosses, a direct target for murders and violence. And it was exactly those days when the first secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Azerbaijan, Abdulrahman Vezirov, made a speech on TV, which was full of hysteric anti-Armenian rhetoric. That was the call to start violence, and the Vandals began acting. They started to do what was first heard on July 18, 1988, by Mikhail Gorbachev, who asked a question to the parliament members from Armenia. Have you considered what might happen to the 200,000 Armenian population of Baku? General Alexander Lebed, in his book, My Life and My Country, wrote, they were catching and beating to death the Armenians, and at the same time, the Jews, Ossetians, Georgians, and all others who resembled Armenians to a greater or lesser extent. They were beating in the face, not in the passport.
Я занимался эвакуацией армян из Баку. Отправлял колонны на Дербент, отправлял порты на Москву, на Ереван, в другие города. Пытался убедить в том, что не надо убивать людей за то, что они родились армянами. Это не получилось. Нет, не удалось. Убедить не удалось. Не удалось эвакуировать.
In the course of Armenian pogroms in Baku, the raging crowd literally tore a man apart, and his remains were thrown into a garbage bin. From an article in Soyuz Weekly, May 19, 1990. The group commander, Azeri by origin, goes out to the town on assignment. Upon returning, he immediately asks for vodka. He is furious. He had seen how a woman was thrown out of the window from a balcony of a multi-storied building, naked, into a fire of burning furniture. And then, a militant from the People's Front of Azerbaijan was waving that woman's ear from the balcony, testified Soviet Army officer Alexei Vasilyev. Evgeny Primakov announced at the closed session of the Supreme Council of the USSR on March 5, 1990. We witnessed how in the situation, when the wild anti-Armenian pogroms brought about numerous human casualties, in numbered days, dozens of thousands of Armenians lost their houses and were deported from the country.